Hello, this is Christine Perez, and today I would like to open the presentation with documentation. The aim is to discuss and to clarify what information goes into each observation that is entered into teaching strategies. I like to compare each observation to a story. When an observation is read, who will hear the story? Staff? A family member? When you look back, when you read your observation, do you see a picture? Do you hear new words the child hasn't used before? When you read an observation or listen to an observation, do you hear sentences? Do you see emotions in the pictures? In the picture where the child is snapping links or has snapped links together or completed a puzzle, does this information tell the reader what is happening, what objectives and dimensions are met? Luckily, we can add notes, pictures, video, or audio to an observation that will explain what the child is doing and any vocabulary used as the child expresses themselves. An observation captures that moment in time that highlights a child's learning and development. Here's a great quote by Benjamin Franklin. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn. You'll find that Teaching Strategies provides research and learning material that supports this quote. Research by Rubin, Bukowski, and Parker tells us that young children's social emotional development involves learning how to understand their own and others' feelings. This is just one example. Here at El Hogar, I genuinely feel that staff and children are involved. But this portion is about documentation, and so I will begin. An observation or documentation begins with providing notes that are authentic, factual, and are ongoing. Notes reflect the curriculum, the lesson plan, and the outcome of the child's learning and development over a period of time. Observations and assessments will pull together all of this information and can serve as indicators of further evaluation. Observations also guide planning. A few points to recall when entering documentation. Number one, who are you observing? 2, how will you describe their actions? 3, what action is taking place? And 4, what was the result? All of these questions will be answered in your observation. Where did the action take place? Did it occur in the gross motor room, during a nature walk, during a virtual meeting? Add a picture, a video, and some backup that you collected or that a parent sent. Include any responses received from the parent or a family member. Something else to remember is that one piece of documentation can cover multiple children, just as long as each child's response for your observation is recorded to assess each child's skills, knowledge, and abilities. In each observation or piece of documentation, most importantly, you want to be intentional, authentic, and accurately identify correct objectives and dimensions that will support children's learning from week to week. From my experience, I use morning circle time as an opportunity to scaffold children's learning and to conduct observations. For example, before we begin singing, I apply complex language and directions. Before we sing, I tell the group, tell me what animal it is, what sound it makes, what color it is, and how many. When you analyze the experience, does the child comprehend language used, follow directions, speak clearly, use an expressive vocabulary? You can apply the objective of language and dimensions to this observation. During this presentation, you will hear from teacher Rosario Caballero, who will share helpful, useful, time-saving strategies and instructions. We like instructions, right? Rosario will explain on the spot, and you will utilize this tool to record observations for documentation. You will also hear from teacher Luis Bonilla. Luis will discuss preliminary levels and documentation status, along with other information. The next few slides will guide you through the process of documenting an observation. I know we've all done this a million times. I know. But a few important pieces of information are: list the correct date, list the facts. Did the child throw the ball overhead? Roll the ball using one hand? Catch the ball between both arms? This is important. That's factual. Here, you'll find an example of selecting a child or children. And you'll see that you have 7 children here. So correctly choose the child or children to base your observation on. In your observation, explain the action behind the observation, meaning use descriptive words to describe how the child demonstrated traveling skills, how they interacted with friends, provide examples of social and emotional engagement. How did the child problem solve? What did the child create? This is where photos come in really handy. What did the child say? Use quotes. How did the child express their feelings and emotions? Last week I had a child tell me, I feel happy. That is an example of him, a child, expressing their feelings and emotions. What tools are you using to gather observations? Are you using creative curriculum learning games and daily routines? These tools can assist with collecting observations. How do you manage collecting information and entering observations? Throughout the year, you can refine your approach to collecting data or information and entering observations. Develop a method that works for you. Maybe you write information in a notebook, take pictures, use sticky notes, and then find them a week later tucked into your sweater. Or do you document parents' responses? Connect the action taking place to the learning experience, and to the objective and dimension that relate. And use your backup, your photo, your recording as your support. Observations and backup support what the child knows and what the child is able to do. Observations demonstrate the child's attention and participation in the activity. And they also support connections to past experiences. In the next slide, a picture provides all of these qualities. In this slide, a quick picture tells the whole story. In this picture, it began as a conversation I had with a child. I asked her what she did over the weekend, but before she began, I also asked her, "May I write down your story for a storybook so that you can take it home to Mama?" She agreed, and when I asked her the question, "What did you do over the weekend?" she began her story. And by looking at these direct quotes, you'll see words like swim, ate, ride. All of this added to the child's increasing language. You see where she went, what she ate, who she was with, and what she did. Now, if you remember the slide with the picture of the storybook, the story a child told the teacher, well, that teacher was me. And I asked a question that I ask all the students. And on this day, I asked the student, "What did you do over the weekend?" And she proceeded to tell me this long story as you read from her storybook. She used expressive language. She expanded her vocabulary. I know that she speaks clearly because I heard her. But by reading her story, you'll see that she speaks clearly. She uses conventional grammar, tells about another time and a place. And this is just by capturing one story, I could apply language to it. You could probably apply other objectives and dimensions too. Need some ideas on where to collect observations and information? Occasionally that will happen come end of the year, and you just need that little nudge in the right direction. You can use regular everyday routines to document how the child manages feelings, uses fingers and hands, engages in conversations, sorts and matches toys, participates in reading stories, or understands shapes. You might find this engagement taking place during e-learning, during your virtual meetings. So that's important to know as well. How do you record all those observations? How do you find all the time to record those observations? It's important to set a daily goal. Yes, daily. Not Friday night, daily, every day. And having a plan comes in handy when documenting observations. Set aside time to focus on one child or one small group of children. We've all done it. You realize that the goal is 2 observations per child per day. So break up your observations and use descriptions in your observations. And then you realize that checkpoints are coming up, so have a plan early. Document all that video that you've recorded. Document all those pictures you've taken. Find all those sticky notes you have tucked away. And use your tools to your advantage to select and match your observations using the correct objectives and dimensions. Wait a minute. How many pieces of documentation and how often again? I know, I ask the same questions. As mentioned, 2 observations per child per day with no more than 5 objectives linked to an observation. This way, your observation is much more authentic. The focus is on the intention and motivation on a particular 1, 2, or 3 objectives instead of 10. Remember, no more than 5 objectives. I think we've all been there. I know I've done it. So 2 observations per child per day with no more than 5 objectives tied to that observation. Focus on quality. Quality is key. Documentation. What do we do with all this documentation? Most importantly, be intentional and be specific to that child or that group of children. Don't make your observation too broad, too general. Be specific and intentional. And over time, during a period such as the fall or the winter, the spring, the summer, you'll see that the documentation you've collected shows development and progression and emerging growth. Or you'll see not yet indicators such as not yet or not observed. One final note for documentation: include all virtual connections made. Include all documentation that you've collected during these virtual meetings or e-learning activities. Include all notes or all texts, all pictures that your parents have provided. Create a personal connection and encourage engagement and reaction from the children and the families. We're already performing e-learning activities. We already document every family observation they share with us. Promote learning activities with families and share your observations with the families so that they can engage with you. For instance, I sent a video to one of the students, and to pull the child into the activity, I couldn't see him. I sent a video. But knowing my child, again, know your child, knowing how most likely he would react, I called out his name like 10 seconds into the video. And when the parent sent me a video, she filmed him listening to my video. So yeah, sure, the child lost attention early on, But when I called out his name, it grabbed his attention and he continued to watch the video and he engaged in the activity. So maybe if we engage the families as much as we possibly can, we can gather more feedback and we can enter more documentation.
I will talk about on-the-spot observation recording tool. The use of this tool is optional, but if you choose to use this tool, you will save a lot of time recording your documentation, especially if you are observing a child in the area of physical, math, and literacy. What is on-the-spot observation recording tool? The on-the-spot observation recording tool is a checklist. Teachers can use it to collect information quickly, either for one child or a group of children. Why we should use on-the-spot observation recording tool? Information about your child's behavior as it occurs during the course of play or planned small group times contributes to the total picture of a child's development. Documenting children's learning means recording and preserving your observations throughout the day. Documentation takes many forms: observation notes, photographs, videos or audio clips, checklists, and samples of children's work. On-the-spot observation recording tool is a form of checklist, which is used to record children's observations. How to use on-the-spot recording tool. This tool only focuses on 3 developmental areas, which are physical, math, and literacy. When you want to use the on-the-spot recording tool, first you need to find the indicator and level that best describes a child's skills and behaviors. Write the date that you observe these skills and behaviors. If you use a particular assessment opportunity card to gather the information, note this. At the progress checkpoints, refer to both on-the-spot observation recording tool and other documentation before making your final readings. To generate an on-the-spot recording tool in My Teaching Strategies, first you need to click in the Assets area. Then you will select On the Spot, which is on the top navigation menu. Then you will select the child that you would like to include in your report. You can select all the children at once, or you can select only one child at a time. I like to use just one child at a time because that way I can focus only on a particular child when I'm doing my observations. Then, to show the colored bands, select Color and the Select Output. Then you will expand the Selected Objectives and Dimensions drop-down menu by clicking the plus icon and customize which objectives dimensions are shown in the tool. Remember that only physical, literacy, Spanish literacy, and math objectives and dimensions can be included in the on-the-spot recording tool. You can choose to print the instructions by selecting Instructions. Then you click Next. If you choose to include instructions, those will appear at the top of the on-the-spot recording tool. Each included progression will appear with your class list below the instructions. Then you select Print to print on-the-spot recording tool. Then you have your hard copy ready to start observing your children during different times of the day. For the final part of using the on-the-spot recording tool, you need to translate the information you have in your hard copy to the system. First, you need to click in the Add Documentation section. Then you will select the child you observe. Then under Documentation Type, you will select On the Spot. Select an objective and click Next. For the final step, you will select the preliminary level and save it. Remember that you don't need to add notes, a video, or pictures when using on-the-spot recording tool. You just need the date, name of the child, and select the objectives you observed. You must select at preliminary level every time you enter an observation. I like to use on-the-spot recording tool when I'm observing my children in the physical area. I think it is an easy way to obtain information for your children, and it's very easy to do it. Also, it saves you a lot of time.
Hello everyone, this is Teacher Luis from 7A, and I will be talking about how to add documentation on teaching strategies. Documentation is created from observations through various methods, such as written notes, pictures, or videos. Once you have created or collected some form of documentation, you can log into teaching strategies and add it to a child's portfolio. From the main page, you can click on either the Assess tab at the top or the Add Documentation button under Quick Links. On this page, you will be presented with different fields that help specify the documentation. You can input the date the observations were made, the children that are involved, and the documentation type. At the bottom, you can type in the notes, upload a media file, and assign the objectives and dimensions that are most appropriate. When adding notes, it's important to be as objective as possible and describe in detail what a child says or does. We want to make sure that we are submitting quality observations based on the facts and not our personal feelings or perceptions. Some teachers prefer to handwrite notes and observations, so as a time-saving strategy, you can take a photo of your notes and upload them instead of having to transcribe everything. When adding documentation, we want to be cognizant of certain things. First is being objective and fact-based in observations. Observations are not open to interpretation or debate. We are not trying to explain why something is happening, but simply painting a picture of what was seen or heard. We also want to avoid negative documentation. For example, Johnny scratched his classmate on the arm when they refused to share the toy. While this might be true, we are trying to gauge a child's developmental progress, not any potential regression. These types of observations are better suited for incident or accident reports to be shared directly with the parents. When adding documentation, a child's name can be used if they are the only one mentioned, such as Johnny rolled the ball. However, if multiple children are mentioned, use initials such as JC and AG played together with a ball. This is done in order to respect the privacy of other children when documentation is shared with other families. Lastly, try to add documentation frequently to avoid a workload rush before the checkpoint due date. After you have entered the necessary information, you can click on Save and Continue, which brings you to this page. Here, you can assign preliminary levels for the objectives related to a particular piece of documentation. Based on the description, you can gauge what level you think the child falls under. If you are unsure, click on the small light bulb icon to see examples. Once you have a good idea, click on the small circle to select that level. You will do this for all the objectives you have selected by clicking the Next button on the very bottom until there are none left, in which case you will click on the Save and Close button. These preliminary levels will make selecting checkpoints at the end of the quarter much easier. Once you have completed a piece of documentation, you can add another one or view the one you just recently finished. It's good to review it, especially to make sure that all the levels were entered for all objectives. This is represented by the green check mark. If there is an objective that is missing, you can go back to edit. When modifying documentation, if necessary, you can modify, edit, and delete documentation from the View Documentation screen. These tabs will be on the left side of the page. In order to keep track of all the documentation you have entered, you can generate a documentation status report by clicking on the Report tab at the top of the page. It will display the children in your class and how many pieces of documentation you have entered for them. If there is a domain that needs more documentation, you can prepare a lesson to target those specific objectives. Thank you for listening.